The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and heavy, with my name written in fountain pen across the front. I almost didn't open it. After 3 months of sleeping in my car and showering at the gym, I'd learned that official-looking mail usually meant more bad news. But something about the return address made my hands shake as I tore it open in the parking lot of the public library where I spent most of my days now. Estate of William Hartley. My childhood hero. The author who had saved my life when I was 12 years old, whose books I'd read under my blankets with a flashlight, while my stepmother Linda screamed at my father downstairs. William Hartley had been dead for 15 years, but apparently his estate had just found a letter I'd written to him when I was that scared, lonely 12-year-old girl. And they wanted to meet me. If you've ever felt invisible, like your existence doesn't matter to anyone, then you'll understand why I'm sharing this story. Sometimes the universe has a way of remembering us when everyone else has forgotten. If my story gives you even a spark of hope, please take a moment to like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they matter too. My name is Emma, and until that Tuesday morning, I was 23 years old and completely alone in the world. Not the romantic kind of alone that poets write about, but the crushing kind where you could disappear and no one would file a missing persons report. My father had died 6 months ago, and with him went the last person who even pretended to care about my existence. Linda, my stepmother, had made it clear at the funeral that I was no longer welcome in what she now called her house. My stepsisters, Chloe and Madison, had stood behind her like matching bookends, their perfectly manicured hands clutching their designer purses, watching me with the same cold satisfaction they'd perfected since we were teenagers. "Your father left everything to me," Linda had said, not even bothering to lower her voice as other mourners milled around us at the reception. "The house, the accounts, everything. He knew you were too unstable to handle any responsibility." She'd said unstable the way other people might say contagious, like my grief and confusion were diseases she might catch. Madison had actually smirked when she saw me processing the words, and Chloe had taken a photo of me standing there in my borrowed black dress, probably to post on her Instagram story with some cryptic caption about family drama. The truth was, I'd never been unstable. I'd been invisible. In that house, I was the ghost who did the dishes and folded the laundry, the shadow who helped Madison with her college essays, even though she was 2 years older than me, the nothing who sat at the dinner table while Linda regaled my father with stories about Chloe's promotion or Madison's new boyfriend, never once asking about my day, my dreams, my existence. My father would sometimes look at me with this helpless expression, like he wanted to include me, but didn't know how to interrupt Linda's monologue. He'd been a weak man, I realize now, but he'd been my weak man, and without him, I had no place in that family at all. The lawyer had been apologetic, but firm. "I'm sorry, Emma, but the will is very clear. Linda gets everything. Your father did mention that he trusted her to do right by you, but legally, that's not binding." He'd shuffled his papers uncomfortably. "Perhaps you could speak with Linda about some kind of arrangement?" I had tried. God, how I had tried. I'd swallowed my pride and asked Linda if I could just stay in my old room for a few weeks while I figured things out. I had a part-time job at a bookstore that barely covered gas money, and I'd been taking online classes toward a literature degree that I could no longer afford. "Please," I'd said, hating how small my voice sounded, "just until I can save up for a deposit somewhere." Linda had looked at me like I was a stray dog begging for scraps. "Emma, you're 23 years old. It's time you learned to stand on your own feet. Your father coddled you for too long, and look where it got you. No real job, no degree, no prospects. Chloe had her own apartment at 21. Madison was already in law school at your age. You need to stop being such a victim and take responsibility for your life." Chloe had walked in then, catching the tail end of the conversation. "Mom's right, Emma. You can't keep mooching off family forever. It's honestly embarrassing. What do I tell my friends when they ask what my stepsister does? Oh, she reads books and feels sorry for herself? She'd laughed, that tinkling, cruel laugh I'd heard so many times before. Maybe if you'd spent less time with your nose in those stupid novels and more time in the real world, you wouldn't be in this situation. Those stupid novels. That's what they'd always called them. The books that had been my only friends, my only escape, my only proof that somewhere in the world there were people who understood what it felt like to be an outsider. And the most important of those books had been William Hartley's The Forgotten Door series. 6 books about a girl who discovered she could slip between worlds, finding places where she belonged, where she was valued, where she was seen. I'd read them so many times the covers had fallen off, held together with duct tape and prayer. When I was 12, in a moment of desperate loneliness, I'd written William Hartley a letter. It had been after a particularly bad night, when Linda had convinced my father that I didn't need to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C., because Emma prefers to be alone anyway, and the money could be better spent on Madison's dance costumes. I'd poured my heart out in that letter, telling him how his books made me feel less alone, how his character Lyra was the big sister I wished I had, how sometimes I pretended I could find a forgotten door of my own and slip away to somewhere better. I'd never gotten a response. I found out later that William Hartley had been battling cancer around that time, and he'd died just 2 years after I sent the letter. But I'd never forgotten the act of writing it, the hope I'd felt dropping it in the mailbox, the way I'd checked the mail every day for months afterward, believing that somehow this stranger would see me in a way my own family couldn't. And now, 11 years later, his estate had found me. The letter in my hands was brief but formal. It was from a law firm called Hartley, Pemberton and Associates, informing me that they had been conducting a final review of William Hartley's personal effects as part of closing out his estate's charitable foundation. They had discovered a box of unopened fan mail that had been misfiled in storage, including my letter. The letter went on to say that Mr. Hartley had left specific instructions in his will regarding any discovered correspondence from young readers, and they needed to meet with me in person to discuss a matter of some importance. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at their offices in the city, a 2-hour drive from where I was currently parking my beat-up Honda Civic in a different spot each night, trying to avoid the attention of police and security guards. I had 4 days to figure out how to look presentable enough for a law office, with exactly $37 to my name and a quarter tank of gas. I spent those 4 days the way I'd spent the previous 3 months, at the public library during the day, using their computers to look for jobs I was never qualified for, and at the 24-hour laundromat at night, where the owner let me sit in the corner with a book as long as I bought a coffee from the vending machine. The laundromat owner, Mr. Kim, was the closest thing I had to a friend these days. He never asked why I was there every night, never commented on the fact that I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, never mentioned that he'd seen me brushing my teeth in his bathroom. He just nodded when I came in, pointed to the fresh pot of free coffee he'd started making after my 3rd week there, and went back to his Korean dramas on his phone. "You look nervous?" he said on Sunday night, the evening before my meeting. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to me. "I have an important meeting tomorrow," I admitted, practicing how to sit up straight in the hard plastic chair, trying to remember how to be a person who had important meetings. Mr. Kim studied me for a moment, then disappeared into the back room. He came back with a garment bag. "My daughter's," he said simply. "She leaves clothes here sometimes when she visits. You're about the same size." Inside was a simple black blazer and a white blouse, both clean and pressed. "For your meeting." I wanted to cry. This stranger had shown me more kindness in that moment than my own family had in years. "I can't." "You can," he interrupted, "and you will bring them back when you're done. Now go practice being important." The next morning, I drove to the city with my windows down because the air conditioning had stopped working months ago, trying not to sweat through the borrowed blouse. The law firm was in one of those gleaming downtown towers that made you feel underdressed just walking past it. I parked 3 blocks away in the cheapest lot I could find and walked the rest of the way, my one pair of decent shoes clicking on the sidewalk in a way that sounded more confident than I felt. The receptionist at Hartley, Pemberton and Associates looked like Chloe and Madison's older, more successful sister. Everything about her was polished and perfect, from her subtle highlights to her understated jewelry. She looked at me with professional courtesy that didn't quite hide her assessment of my borrowed blazer and scuffed shoes. "Emma Winters," I said, trying to sound like someone who belonged in buildings like this. "I have an appointment." Her expression changed immediately when she found my name in her computer. "Oh, Ms. Winters, yes, Mr. Pemberton is expecting you. Please, right this way." She led me through a maze of cubicles and corner offices to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The table was polished wood that probably cost more than my car, and sitting at it was a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Winters," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Charles Pemberton. Thank you so much for coming. Please have a seat. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great," I managed, my mouth suddenly dry. He poured me a glass from a crystal pitcher, then sat down across from me with a thick folder. "I'm sure you're wondering why we asked you here. As our letter mentioned, we recently discovered some correspondence that had been misfiled. Your letter to William Hartley was among them." He pulled out a familiar piece of notebook paper, my 12-year-old handwriting cramped and desperate across the lines. "This letter was particularly significant because of what you wrote and when you wrote it." I looked at my old handwriting, remembering the girl who had written those words. "Dear Mr. Hartley," it began, "you don't know me, but your book saved my life. Not in the dramatic way, but in the real way. The way that matters when you're 12 and no one in your house sees you as anything more than an inconvenience." "I was just a kid," I said softly. I didn't expect him to actually read it. "But he would have," Mr. Pemberton said. William was meticulous about responding to every letter from young readers. He believed that if a child took the time to write to him, the least he could do was write back. "Unfortunately, your letter arrived during his final hospital stay. It was forwarded to his home and somehow got mixed in with business correspondence that was put in storage." He opened the folder and pulled out another document. "What makes your letter particularly significant is this passage here." He pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. "Sometimes I pretend that I'm like Lyra, and that one day I'll find my own forgotten door. But even if I don't, I wanted you to know that you gave me something to hold on to. You made me believe that people like me, the forgotten ones, the invisible ones, we matter too. We have stories worth telling. Maybe someday I'll write books like yours, books that make other lonely kids feel less alone. But even if I don't, I'll never forget what you taught me, that being forgotten doesn't mean you're not worth remembering." Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. William had a tradition. Once a year, he would select one letter from a young reader that particularly moved him. He would set aside a special fund for that child to be held in trust. Your letter was dated October 15th, 2013. William entered the hospital on October 16th, but on October 15th, the last full day he spent in his home, he made one final addition to his will. My hands were shaking as he pulled out another document. "He created an educational trust in your name, Emma. It was meant to be activated when you turned 18, but because we couldn't locate you and the letter was misfiled, it's been sitting in escrow for 5 years, accumulating interest." The room seemed to tilt. "I don't understand." "William left you $200,000, Ms. Winters, specifically earmarked for the education and artistic development of Emma Winters, a young writer who understands the weight of being forgotten." I stared at him. The number didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. 200, but he didn't even know me. "He knew enough," Mr. Pemberton said gently. "He also left you this." It was another envelope, older, with my name written in a shaky hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines. Dear Emma, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, but I wanted you to know, you are not forgotten. You never were. The world is waiting for your stories. Write them. William Hartley P.S. Check the last page of your copy of The Forgotten Door. I think you'll find it's different from everyone else's. I looked up at Mr. Pemberton, confused. The last page? He smiled. William had a tradition with the letters that moved him most. He would commission a special print run of one single book, personalized for that reader. According to his records, a copy of The Forgotten Door was sent to your address in November 2013. Did you ever receive it? My mind raced back. November 2013. I would have been 13. That was the month Linda had convinced my father to declutter my room while I was at school, throwing away what she called duplicate books and old junk. I'd come home to find half my belongings gone, including my books, I whispered. She threw away my books. There were packages I never saw. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Linda had been intercepting my mail even then. A package from William Hartley had arrived for me, and she'd thrown it away. Mr. Pemberton's expression was sympathetic. That's unfortunate, but perhaps... He turned to his computer, typing quickly. William's estate kept one copy of each personalized edition in archives. Let me see. Yes, here it is. We have your copy in storage. I can have it sent to you, along with the trust documents. I started to say I didn't have an address, then stopped. Yes, please. Now, regarding the trust, the funds can be used for any educational purpose. Traditional college, online courses, writing workshops, even living expenses while you pursue your writing. The only requirement is that you use it to develop your voice as a writer. William was very specific about that. He believed you had stories the world needed to hear. I thought about the last 3 months sleeping in my car, wondering if I mattered to anyone, if my existence made any difference at all. And all that time, this had been waiting for me. A stranger who had never met me had believed in me more than my own family. There's one more thing, Mr. Pemberton said. William's estate runs a publishing imprint for new voices in young adult literature. If you ever write something you'd like us to consider, you have an automatic first look deal. No guarantee of publication, of course, but a guarantee that your work will be read and seriously considered. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, tears streaming down my face, clutching the letter from William Hartley like it might disappear if I let go. Mr. Pemberton pushed a box of tissues across the table. Take your time. I know this is a lot to process. My family, I finally managed. They said I was wasting my time with books. They said I was nobody. Well, Mr. Pemberton said with a slight smile, William Hartley disagreed. And between you and me, his opinion carries a bit more weight in the literary world than... He glanced at his notes. Linda, Chloe, and Madison, was it? I laughed through my tears. It felt foreign in my throat, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, setting up the trust, discussing how to access the funds. Mr. Pemberton gave me his direct number and told me to call if I needed anything at all. William would want to make sure you're taken care of, he said. You're part of his legacy now. As I was leaving, the receptionist who had looked at me so dismissively earlier practically tripped over herself to be helpful. Ms. Winters, can I validate your parking? Can I call you a car? No, thank you, I said, standing a little straighter. I have my own car. I walked back to my beat-up Honda Civic feeling like I was floating. The money was life-changing, yes, but it was more than that. Someone had seen me. Someone had believed I had value, had stories worth telling, had a voice that mattered. William Hartley had been dead for 15 years, but he'd reached through time to tell me I wasn't forgotten. I sat in my car for a long time, just holding the letter. Then I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in 3 months. I called Linda. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp with irritation. Emma, What do you want? If you're calling to beg for money again? Actually, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was, I'm calling to ask about some mail that might have arrived for me when I was 13. A package from a publisher. Do you remember throwing it away? There was a pause. I have no idea what you're talking about. We threw away a lot of your junk over the years. You had an unhealthy obsession with those books. Those books, I said slowly, just changed my life. William Hartley left me money in his will, Linda. A lot of money. Money that was waiting for me for 5 years while I slept in my car, because you and my father's money was more important to you than his daughter. The silence on the other end was deafening. That's impossible, she finally said, but her voice had lost its edge. His lawyers seemed to disagree. Oh, and Linda, that package you threw away? It was a personalized edition of his book made just for me. One of a kind. Probably worth thousands to collectors now, but worth more than that to me. You threw away something priceless because you couldn't stand the idea that I might matter to someone. Emma, if there's money involved, we should discuss this as a family. After all, your father would have wanted. I hung up on her. It was the most satisfying thing I'd done in years. The phone immediately started ringing again. Linda, then Chloe, then Madison. I let them all go to voicemail and drove back to the laundromat. Mr. Kim looked up when I walked in, still wearing his daughter's blazer. How was your important meeting? Life-changing, I said, and meant it. Mr. Kim, can I ask you something? Why have you been so kind to me? The free coffee, letting me stay here, the clothes today? You didn't have to do any of that. He was quiet for a moment, then said, My daughter is a writer too. Lives in New York now, writing for magazines. But there was a time when she was sleeping on couches, wondering if her words mattered. Someone helped her then. A stranger who believed in her when her own family thought she was wasting her life. He smiled. I recognized the look in your eyes, the look of someone who has stories to tell but no one to listen. So I listened, in my own way. I wanted to hug him, but I knew that would make us both uncomfortable. Instead, I said, Your daughter is lucky to have you. She's coming to visit next month, he said. You should meet her. I think you'd have a lot to talk about. Over the next few days, I found a small apartment with the first disbursement from the trust. Nothing fancy, just a studio with good light and room for a desk. I enrolled in online courses to finish my degree, and I started writing. Really writing, not just journaling or scribbling, but crafting the stories that had been building up inside me for years. The personalized copy of The Forgotten Door arrived a week later. I turned to the last page with shaking hands. Where every other copy ended with Lyra walking through the final door, mine had an extra paragraph. For Emma, who understands that being forgotten is just the first chapter of your story. The rest is yours to write. Remember, every author was once a lonely kid with a notebook. Every story that matters began with someone who felt like they didn't. You matter. Your voice matters. Now pick up your pen and prove me right. I cried again, but they were different tears than I'd shed in that conference room. These were tears of recognition, of being truly seen for the first time in my life. That night, Chloe tried a different approach. She texted, Emma, Mom told us about your windfall. Congratulations. We should celebrate as a family. After all, we're sisters. We had never been sisters. Not when she posted that photo of me crying at my father's funeral with the caption, Drama Queen Strikes Again. Not when she told her friends I was the charity case her mom had to put up with. Not when she and Madison had laughed about my pathetic little book obsession at every family dinner. I texted back, We're not sisters, we never were. Please don't contact me again. She responded immediately, You can't just cut us out of your life. We're family. Dad would be devastated by how you're acting. I thought about that for a moment. Would my father be devastated? Maybe, but he'd had years to stand up for me, to insist I be treated with basic kindness in my own home, and he'd chosen Linda's comfort over mine every single time. His death had been the final abandonment, leaving me with nothing while ensuring his wife and her daughters were set for life. I didn't respond to Chloe. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing. The story poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. It was about a girl who lived in a house where she was invisible, where her stepfamily treated her like furniture, something to be used when convenient and ignored otherwise. But in this story, the girl didn't need a fairy godmother or a prince. She had something better, the ghost of an author who left her clues in his books, breadcrumbs leading to a treasure that had been waiting for her all along. I wrote for 6 hours straight until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. When I finally stopped, I had 30 pages of the truest fiction I'd ever written. The next morning, Madison showed up at my apartment. I don't know how she found me, but there she was, looking perfect as always in her lawyer clothes and designer heels. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my small studio. She looked around with barely concealed disgust. "God, Emma, this place is depressing. You have money now. Why are you living like this?" "Because this is what I can afford while staying within the trust's guidelines," I said. "Not that it's any of your business." "Everything about you is our business," Madison said. "You're our sister." "Stepsister," I corrected. "And no, I'm not. Your mother made that very clear when she kicked me out with nothing." Madison's face hardened. "Mom was doing what she thought was best. You were 23 and completely dependent. She was trying to teach you to stand on your own feet." "By making me homeless?" "You weren't homeless. You were choosing to be dramatic instead of getting a real job." I stared at her. "I was sleeping in my car, Madison." She waved this away. "You could have asked for help." "I did ask for help. Your mother said I was embarrassing and needed to stop being a victim." "Well, you were being a victim. Look at you now. You got some money and suddenly you think you're better than us?" "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm worth exactly as much as you. That's what you can't stand." Madison's carefully composed face cracked slightly. "You got lucky. One dead writer felt sorry for you. That doesn't change who you are." "You're right," I said. "It doesn't. I'm still the same person I was 3 months ago, sleeping in my car, brushing my teeth in a laundromat bathroom. The only thing that's changed is that now I know that person has value. William Hartley saw it. Mr. Kim at the laundromat saw it. The only people who never saw it were the ones who were supposed to love me." "We did love you," Madison snapped. "Do love you. You're being ridiculous and ungrateful." "When?" I asked. "When did you love me? When you posted photos of me crying at Dad's funeral? When you laughed about my pathetic book obsession with your friends? When you stood behind your mother as she told me I was too unstable to deserve any part of my father's estate? Which part of that was love?" Madison was quiet for a moment, then tried a different tactic. "Look, Emma, let's be practical here. You have no experience managing money. You're going to blow through this trust fund and end up right back where you started. Why don't you let me help you invest it properly? I have connections." "The trust is managed by professional investors," I interrupted. "I couldn't blow through it if I wanted to. It's specifically structured to support my education and writing career." "Writing career?" Madison laughed, the same cruel tinkle as her sister. "Emma, be realistic. You're not a writer. You're a bookworm who got lucky. There's a difference." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather fail as a writer than succeed as whatever you are. Now please leave." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "When you crash and burn, don't come crying to us. You're choosing to throw away your family for some fantasy about being a writer. Dad would be ashamed of you." After she left, I sat on my bed and thought about what she'd said. Would my father be ashamed? Maybe. He'd always been caught between wanting to support me and wanting to keep Linda happy. But William Hartley wouldn't be ashamed. The man who had never met me but believed I had stories worth telling, he would understand. That night, I got an email from Mr. Pemberton. Emma, I hope you're settling in well. I wanted to let you know that William's daughter Sarah will be in town next week. She's now the head of the Hartley Foundation and would very much like to meet you. She was particularly moved by your letter. Would you be available for lunch on Thursday? Sarah Hartley. I'd read about her in interviews. William's only child, now a successful author in her own right. The idea of meeting her was both thrilling and terrifying. I agreed to the lunch, then spent the next 3 days alternating between writing and panicking about what to wear. I finally decided on the only decent outfit I owned, the blazer Mr. Kim's daughter had lent me, which I'd bought from him despite his protests, and a simple black dress I'd found at a thrift store. Sarah Hartley looked nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the polished literary figure I'd imagined, she was wearing jeans and a paint-stained NYU sweatshirt, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun. She stood up when she saw me, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "Emma," she said, holding me at arm's length to look at me, "I'm so glad we found you. I've been thinking about you since Charles showed me your letter." We sat down, and she immediately pushed a wrapped package across the table. This was in my father's things. He had me help him pick it out right before he went into the hospital. He said it was for a special reader, but he never got to send it. Inside was a first edition of The Forgotten Door, signed, "For the Next Storyteller, W.H." "He bought this for me?" I whispered. "He was going to include it with your personalized copy," Sarah said. "He did that sometimes, for the letters that really touched him. Yours..." "Emma, I need you to understand something. My father received thousands of letters over his career. Thousands. But yours was one of only 12 he ever set up trusts for. And it was the very last one." She pulled out a familiar piece of notebook paper, a photocopy of my letter. "This line here," she said, pointing, "being forgotten doesn't mean you're not worth remembering." My father talked about that line in his last days. He said it was the truest thing he'd ever read about loneliness. I couldn't speak. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He also said something else," she continued. "He said that the forgotten ones often have the most important stories to tell, because they see what others miss. They notice the shadows, the spaces between words, the people who fall through cracks. He believed you would write those stories one day." "I'm trying," I said. "I've been writing every day since I found out about the trust, but I don't know if any of it's good." "Can I tell you a secret?" Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "My father's first novel was rejected 37 times. 37. He wallpapered his office with the rejection letters, but he kept writing because he believed the forgotten kids needed his stories. And he was right." She smiled. "Now there's a new generation of forgotten kids who need yours." We talked for 2 hours about writing, about books, about the weight of carrying stories no one else wants to hear. Sarah told me about growing up as William Hartley's daughter, always feeling like she had to live up to his legacy. I told her about growing up invisible in a house full of people who looked right through me. "You know what the ironic thing is?" I said. "If Linda hadn't thrown away that package, if I'd gotten the personalized book when I was 13, it might have changed everything. I might have felt seen enough to speak up, to fight for myself, to demand better treatment. But then I wouldn't have the stories I have now. I wouldn't understand what it really means to be forgotten." Sarah nodded slowly. "My father used to say that our wounds become our wisdom, but only if we're brave enough to examine them. It sounds like you're doing that." Before we parted, she handed me a business card. "This is my personal email. Send me your writing when you're ready. Not for publication necessarily, just, I'd like to read your stories. I think my father would have liked to read them too." That night, Linda called again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Emma," she said, her voice different than I'd ever heard it. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the package." I waited. "I did throw it away," she admitted. "I remember now. It came right after parent-teacher conferences, where your English teacher said you were gifted, that we should encourage your writing. I was angry. Chloe and Madison were struggling in school, and here you were, being called gifted. It didn't seem fair. So you threw away my mail? I threw away what I thought was just another book. I didn't know it was special. I didn't know any of this would happen. Would it have mattered if you did? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. No, she finally said. It wouldn't have. I wanted you to be less than my daughters. I needed you to be less, so they could be more. I'm not apologizing, Emma. I'm just telling you the truth. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Thank you for that, I said, and meant it. Goodbye, Linda. Wait, she said quickly. The money. Your father would have wanted... I hung up. My father was dead, and what he would have wanted stopped mattering the day he signed everything over to a woman who threw away my mail because I was too gifted for her comfort. Over the next 6 months, I established a routine. I took online classes in the morning, wrote in the afternoon, and worked part-time at a local bookstore in the evenings. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed to be around books and people who loved them. The bookstore owner, Marcus, not Chen, was a retired professor who treated every book like a friend and every customer like a potential convert to the religion of reading. You have good hands, he told me one day, watching me carefully arrange a display of new releases. Book hands, gentle but sure. I thought about all the books I'd held over the years, all the stories that had held me when no one else would. Books saved my life, I said simply. Mine too, Marcus replied. That's why I opened this place, to pass on the favor. I told him about William Hartley, about the trust, about the letter. He listened without interrupting, then disappeared into the back room. He came back with a battered copy of The Forgotten Door. This was my daughter's, he said. She's grown now, a doctor in Boston, but when she was young, this was her favorite book. She must have read it 20 times. He handed it to me. She left it here years ago, said to give it to someone who would understand it. I think that's you. I opened the cover. Inside, in a child's careful handwriting, was written, "This book made me brave. Jennifer, age 11." That night, I wrote to Sarah Hartley. Not with my fiction, not yet, but with the story of the bookstore, of Marcus and his daughter's book, of Mr. Kim and his writer-daughter, of all the small kindnesses that had kept me afloat when my own family let me drown. She wrote back within an hour. These are the stories, Emma. The connections between strangers, the books that pass from hand to hand carrying courage and comfort. This is what my father believed in. Keep writing. So I did. I wrote about the girl who was invisible until a dead author saw her. I wrote about the stepfamily who only noticed her when she had something they wanted. I wrote about sleeping in cars and washing in public bathrooms and the peculiar freedom of having nothing left to lose. But mostly, I wrote about books, the way they could be doors and mirrors and maps all at once, showing you yourself while leading you somewhere new. 8 months after that first meeting with Mr. Pemberton, I finished my first novel. It was called Letters to the Dead, and it was about a girl who discovers that the author she'd been writing to had been receiving her letters all along, leaving her clues in his books, creating a treasure hunt that would only activate after his death. It was fiction, but it was true in all the ways that mattered. I sent it to Sarah with shaking hands and a simple note. I think I found my voice. She called me 3 days later, crying. Emma, this is extraordinary. It's exactly the kind of story my father believed you would write. Raw and honest and hopeful all at once. Can I send it to his editor? She's been looking for new voices for the Hartley Foundation imprint. I said yes, barely able to breathe. 2 weeks later, I got an email that changed my life for the second time. They wanted to publish my book. More than that, they wanted a 3-book deal, believing I had more stories to tell. The advance wasn't huge, nothing like what established authors get, but it was more money than I'd ever imagined earning from my writing. Combined with the trust, I could actually build a life as a writer. I could be what Chloe and Madison had mocked me for dreaming about. The book came out a year later, with a dedication that said simply, "For William Hartley, who remembered me when I was forgotten. And for all the invisible kids reading this, you matter, you're seen, and your story is waiting to be told." The launch party was small, just publishing people and a few friends I'd made over the year. Marcus came, and Mr. Kim brought his daughter, who turned out to be funny and sharp and working on her own novel. Sarah Hartley gave a speech that made everyone cry, reading from my original letter to her father and talking about the power of believing in strangers. I didn't invite Linda, Chloe, or Madison, but somehow they found out. Madison sent a text. "Saw your book at Barnes & Noble. Dad would have been proud." I didn't respond. Chloe posted on Instagram a photo of my book with the caption, "So proud of my talented sister. Always knew she'd make it." The comments were full of her friends, congratulating her for being so supportive. I blocked her. Linda sent a card to my publisher, who forwarded it to me. Inside, in her perfect handwriting, she'd written, "I was wrong. Nothing else. No apology, no request for forgiveness, just those 3 words." I kept the card, not out of sentiment, but as proof that even the people who try to erase you can't deny your existence when it's printed on the spine of a book. The novel did well. Not bestseller well, but well enough that libraries ordered it, and teenagers wrote to tell me it made them feel seen. That was worth more than any royalty check. One letter particularly stood out. It was from a 15-year-old girl named Amy, whose handwriting reminded me of my own at that age, cramped and urgent, like she was afraid the words would disappear if she didn't get them down fast enough. "Dear Ms. Winters," she wrote, "I live with my aunt and her kids, and they treat me like I'm a burden they have to bear." I was starting to believe them, starting to think maybe I really was worthless, but then I read your book, and I realized being forgotten doesn't mean you're forgettable. It just means you're waiting for the right person to remember you. Thank you for remembering kids like me. I wrote her back immediately, a long letter about resilience and hope and the power of stories to keep us alive when nothing else can. I sent her a signed copy of my book and a first edition of The Forgotten Door I'd found at an estate sale. Inside I wrote, "For Amy, who will never be forgotten again. Your story matters. Emma." I also set up a fund, smaller than what William had done but following his model. Each year, I would choose one letter from a young reader and set aside money for their education. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was remembering forward. 2 years passed. I published my second novel, taught writing workshops at the community center, and built a life that felt like mine. I dated a guy named Tom who worked at the coffee shop next to Marcus's bookstore, a quiet artist who understood the weight of words and the necessity of silence. I adopted a cat named Lyra, after William Hartley's character. I learned to cook more than ramen and cereal. I learned to take up space in rooms, to speak without apologizing, to exist without permission. Then one day my phone rang. It was Mr. Pemberton. "Emma, I have some unusual news. We've been contacted by a production company. They want to option your first novel for a streaming series. But here's the interesting part. They also want to do a documentary about William Hartley's letter program, featuring your story as the centerpiece." I sat down hard on my couch, Lyra jumping into my lap. "A documentary?" "They've already interviewed Sarah, and she's told them about your letter and the trust. They want to film you visiting schools, talking to young writers, showing how one letter can change a life. They're calling it Letters to Tomorrow." "What about my family?" I asked, the old fear creeping in. "What if they try to insert themselves into this?" Mr. Pemberton's voice was firm. "You control your narrative, Emma. You decide who's part of your story and who isn't. The production company has been very clear. This is your story to tell." I thought about Linda, Chloe, and Madison, how they would hate being excluded from something that might bring attention and acclaim. They'd spent years telling me I was nothing, and now I had the power to return the favor, to make them nothing in the story of my life. But I also thought about William Hartley, about Sarah, about Mr. Kim and Marcus, and all the strangers who had seen me when my own family couldn't. I thought about Amy and the other kids who wrote to me, looking for proof that they mattered. "I'll do it," I said, "but on one condition. Part of the proceeds go to funding more educational trusts for young writers. William Hartley remembered me. I want to remember others." The documentary, filmed over 6 months, They Has, followed me to school visits, to writing workshops, to the laundromat where Mr. Kim still made his free coffee and smiled his quiet smile. They interviewed Sarah, who talked about her father's belief in the power of correspondence. They even found 3 other recipients of William's trusts, all of us now writers or teachers or librarians, all of us saved by a stranger's faith. The hardest part was when they asked about my family. I sat in front of the camera, choosing my words carefully. "I was raised by people who couldn't see me," I said finally. Not because I was invisible, but because seeing me would have required them to see themselves differently. William Hartley didn't have that problem. He could see me clearly because he had no investment in my being small. Sometimes the strangers who save us are the only ones who can, because they have nothing to gain from our diminishment. The documentary aired 6 months later. I watched it alone in my apartment, Lyra purring on my chest, Tom holding my hand. Seeing my story on screen was surreal. The girl sleeping in her car, the letter from the estate, the moment I realized I'd been remembered by someone who'd never forgotten me. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded with messages from other forgotten kids, from stepchildren and foster children, and anyone who'd ever felt invisible in their own home. My book sales tripled. Speaking requests poured in, but the most unexpected response came in a voicemail from Madison. "Emma," she said, her voice strange and strained. "I watched the documentary. I didn't know. About the car, about the laundromat. Mom told us you were being dramatic, that you were fine. I didn't know." A pause. "I'm not calling to apologize. I don't think you'd believe me if I did. I'm calling to say, you were right. We weren't sisters. We never were. And that was my loss." I listened to the message 3 times, then deleted it. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ash. The streaming series based on my novel premiered a year later. They'd changed things, of course, made it more dramatic, added a love interest, gave my character a quirky best friend who didn't exist in real life. But they kept the heart of it, the girl who was forgotten until a dead author remembered her. At the premiere, I wore a designer dress for the first time in my life, borrowed from Sarah, who insisted I needed to look like the author you are. I brought Tom and Mr. Kim and Marcus as my guests. The photos from that night show me laughing, surrounded by people who chose to see me, to value me, to remember me. Linda saw those photos. I know because she sent another card, this time to my apartment. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note. "Your father would want you to have this." I sent the check back with my own note. "I have everything I need." It was true. I had my writing, my community, my cat, my quiet love with Tom. I had readers who wrote to tell me my words mattered. I had the memory of William Hartley, a stranger who had believed in me before I believed in myself. But most importantly, I had learned the truth that no amount of money could buy. Being forgotten by the people who should remember you doesn't mean you're not worth remembering. It just means you were waiting for the right people to find you. The 5th anniversary of Finding William's letter is coming up next week. Sarah and I are planning to announce a new program, the Forgotten Writers Fund, endowed partly by the documentary proceeds and partly by William's estate. We'll select 10 young writers each year, kids whose letters show that particular combination of pain and hope that marks a true storyteller. "Your father would love this," I told Sarah as we reviewed the applications. "He would," she agreed, "but I think he'd love even more that you're the one doing it. You're proof that his theory was right. The forgotten ones have the most important stories to tell. Last week, I got a letter that stopped me cold. The return address was from a group home in Ohio, and the handwriting was so careful it hurt to look at. "Dear Ms. Winters," it began, "my name is Marcus, and I'm 13 years old. I've been in foster care since I was 8. I just read your book, and I wanted you to know that you made me believe something I'd stopped believing, that someday someone will remember me, that I'm worth remembering. I don't need money or anything. I just needed to tell someone who would understand. I exist. I matter, even if nobody sees it yet." I wrote him back that day, a long letter filled with all the things I wish someone had told me when I was 13 and invisible. I sent him books, not just mine, but all the ones that had saved me. And I started the paperwork to add him to next year's fund recipients. Because that's what we do, those of us who were forgotten and then found. We remember forward. We look for the invisible ones and say, "I see you. You matter. Your story is waiting." William Hartley has been dead for 20 years now, but his belief in a scared 12-year-old girl created ripples that are still spreading. Every letter I answer, every young writer I encourage, every story I tell is proof that he was right to remember me. And in the end, that's all any of us want, isn't it? To be remembered, to matter, to know that our existence changes something, however small, in the fabric of the world. I was forgotten. Then a letter I wrote to my hero as a child was answered by his estate, and in that answer I found not just money or opportunity, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that I had always been worth remembering. I just had to wait for the right people to see it. The girl sleeping in her car 3 years ago wouldn't believe where I am now, but I think 12-year-old Emma, writing that desperate letter to her favorite author, somehow knew this was possible. She knew that words could be doors, that stories could be salvation, that sometimes strangers see us more clearly than family ever could. Tomorrow, I'm visiting a high school to talk to young writers. I'll tell them what William Hartley told me, what I tell every forgotten kid who writes to me. You are not invisible. You are not worthless. You are not forgotten. You are simply waiting for your story to begin. And when it does, when someone finally sees you for who you really are, you'll realize you were never truly forgotten at all. You were just being saved for the people who would know how to remember you properly. That's the magic of letters, of books, of stories. They find us when we need them most, written by strangers who become more family than family, reaching across time and space to say, "I see you, you matter. Now pick up your pen and prove me right." William Hartley never read my letter while he was alive, but somehow, in the strange alchemy of love and literature, he answered it anyway, and his answer changed everything. End. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true worth seen, please like on this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below and tell me, what was the moment in the story that resonated with you the most? And if you want more powerful stories about finding your strength and overcoming the odds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.